I have a patch of tomatoes in my backyard right now that is so heavy with fruit, I had to reinforce the cages with extra stakes. And my neighbor walked by yesterday and asked if I was secretly running a commercial farm. She was standing there with her coffee, staring at this wall of green that has completely swallowed the north side of my yard, and the look on her face was somewhere between admiration and genuine confusion. Because she has seen my garden in previous years. She has seen the leggy tomatoes and the sparse peppers, and the basil that never quite took off. She has politely accepted the handful of cherry tomatoes I used to offer, the ones that were fine but never impressive. And now she is looking at plants that are taller than she is, dripping with fruit, and she wants to know what changed. I told her the truth, which is that I added one thing to the garden this season, one single ingredient that costs less than a cup of coffee, and the results were honestly kind of shocking. I have been gardening for a good 15 years, and I have never, hand on heart, seen production like this. The plants are not just bigger. They are denser, darker green, with stems as thick as my thumb and flowers that just keep coming. I walk out there every morning with my coffee, and I just stand there for a minute, looking at what the soil decided to do this year, and it feels like I finally cracked a code that has been eluding me since I put my first tomato seedling in the ground a decade and a half ago. And the thing that gets me every time is that this ingredient has been sitting in my kitchen cabinet for years, and I never once thought to put it in the soil. The reason you have likely never heard of it is honestly kind of annoying. It works too well and costs too little for anyone to sell it to you in a fancy package with a catchy name. There is no patent on it, no marketing budget behind it, no shelf space at the garden center, with a glossy label showing impossibly perfect vegetables. And the gardening industry makes a lot more money when you keep buying bottle after bottle of liquid fertilizers that promise miracles and deliver maybe a handful of extra tomatoes. I fell for it for over a decade. I bought the fish emulsion, the seaweed extracts, the expensive granular slow-release pellets with the shiny labels. Every spring I would spend $50, $60 on soil amendments, and still end up with plants that looked okay, but never quite matched the pictures on the seed packets. I would stand in the fertilizer aisle and read the promises on the back of each bottle, the bigger blooms and the larger fruit and the healthier roots, and I would hand over my money thinking this year would be different. And every August I would be out there looking at plants that were fine, just fine, and wondering what I was missing. I thought that was just how it was. That the photos were exaggerated. That my soil was just average, and I had to accept average results. I was wrong. Let me just show you what I am talking about. Walk with me to the garden for a second. My tomatoes this year are pushing 7 feet tall. The cherry tomatoes especially. They have completely swallowed their trellis and are now reaching over into the pepper bed like they own the place. I have to duck under a canopy of leaves just to harvest the inner fruit, and I keep finding clusters of tomatoes I missed because they are hidden behind so much foliage. I have harvested more cucumbers than I can pickle, and I have given away so many zucchini that my friends have started avoiding me when they see me carrying a paper bag. I showed up at a barbecue last weekend with a crate of produce, and someone actually said, "Please, no more. We cannot eat another cucumber." And the flowers. I planted marigolds along the border, just a few, and they have turned into these massive bushes of orange and yellow that the bees cannot stay away from. The hummingbirds have found them too. I sit on the back steps in the evening and watch this little ecosystem I created, and it hums. It literally hums with life. This is not a brag. This is just what happened when I stopped buying the complicated stuff and started using one simple mineral that plants have been craving since before humans figured out agriculture. I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Probably just another miracle internet trick that does not actually work at all. I completely understand your skepticism. I thought exactly the same thing until I saw with my own eyes what this thing can do. I am the kind of person who rolls their eyes at garden hacks. I have tried the banana peel water and the eggshell tea and the coffee ground mulch, and most of it is just composting with extra steps. I have soaked weeds in buckets to make fermented plant juice that smelled like a swamp and did nothing noticeable. I have buried fish heads under my tomatoes because someone on a forum swore it would change my life, and all I got was a raccoon digging up my bed at 2 in the morning. I have been burned by enough internet wisdom to be properly cynical. So when I first heard about this, I dismissed it for 2 full seasons before I finally gave in and tested it on a single raised bed, just to prove it wrong. And then that bed outperformed everything else in the garden so dramatically that I spent the next weekend applying it to every square inch of soil I own. I literally walked out there with my bucket and my measuring spoon, and I did not stop until every bed was done, because the evidence was right in front of me and I could not argue with it. So here is the problem we are all trying to solve. You start your seeds indoors in March, you baby them under grow lights, you harden them off carefully, you dig perfect holes with compost and worm castings, you mulch, you water consistently, and still, by mid-July, things are just fine. Not great. Fine. The leaves are a little pale. The fruit is coming in small. The plants look tired, like they are working too hard for too little reward. You walk out there in the morning, and instead of that burst of excitement at seeing new growth, you feel this low-grade disappointment. You did the work. You put in the hours. And the garden is giving you back something that feels like 70% of what it should be. Do you know that feeling? I know it all too well. And you stand there with your watering wand, and you wonder what you did wrong, because you followed all the advice. You did everything the garden center told you to do. You bought the compost, you added the fertilizer, you checked the pH, you mulched with straw, you watered deeply and infrequently like all the books say. And the answer is usually not that you did something wrong. It is that you did not do one specific thing that makes everything else work better. You built the whole machine, but you forgot to turn on the engine. Before I tell you what that thing is, let me walk you through the usual fixes and why they fall short. Because I have tried them all, and I want you to understand why this one is different. First, there is the vinegar approach, which you see all over the internet. People will tell you to spray your plants with diluted vinegar for nutrients, or to acidify the soil. Here is the problem. Vinegar is acetic acid, and while a tiny bit might not kill your plants, it does absolutely nothing to feed them in any meaningful way. It is like trying to fuel your car by pouring soda in the gas tank. Technically, there is energy in there, but the engine cannot use it, and you might ruin something in the process. Plus, vinegar can burn roots if the concentration is too high, and it kills beneficial soil bacteria that your plants depend on. You know those little white threads of mycelium that run through healthy soil, the fungal networks that connect plants and shuttle nutrients around. Vinegar destroys those. It is a sterilizing agent. You are pouring a mild acid onto a living system and hoping it somehow feeds it. That makes no sense when you stop and think about it. So we set that one aside. Then there is the salt crowd, and I am not talking about table salt. I am talking about Epsom salt, magnesium sulfate. This one has a kernel of truth to it. Magnesium is a real nutrient that plants need. It is the central atom in chlorophyll, the molecule that makes leaves green and drives photosynthesis. Without magnesium, chlorophyll cannot form, and your plants turn yellow and starve. So people hear that, and they start dumping Epsom salt on everything. They mix it into the planting hole. They dissolve it in water and spray it on the leaves. They sprinkle it around the base of the plant like they are seasoning a steak. The problem is that most soils are not actually deficient in magnesium, and adding too much can lock up calcium, which gives you blossom end rot on your tomatoes. You fix one invisible problem and create a very visible one. You end up with beautiful green plants and tomatoes that rot on the bottom before they ripen. It is like patching a hole in your roof by drilling another hole to let the water drain. The logic seems sound until you are standing in a flooded living room. Then we have the chemical fertilizers, the blue powders and the concentrated liquids. These do work, I will give them that. They work fast and they work dramatically. You mix a little scoop of blue crystals into your watering can, you pour it on, and within days your plants are greener and bigger and you feel like a genius. But they work like a sugar rush. The plant absorbs the soluble nutrients immediately, puts on a burst of growth, and then crashes when the supply runs out, which it does quickly because those nutrients wash right through the soil with every rain or watering. They are designed to be highly soluble so they are immediately available, which means they are also immediately leachable. And while they are flushing away, they are also killing the microbial life in your soil that would otherwise be slowly and steadily feeding your plants for free. The salts in those synthetic fertilizers draw water out of microbial cells through osmosis, essentially dehydrating the very organisms you should be cultivating. It is a cycle of dependency. You apply, you see results. The results fade, you apply again. The garden center loves this cycle. Your wallet does not. And your soil gets worse every year, requiring more and more inputs to produce the same output. It is a treadmill, and once you are on it, getting off is hard because the soil biology is so depleted that nothing grows without the blue powder. And then there is boiling water. I do not even want to spend much time on this one. Boiling water is for killing weeds in sidewalk cracks. If you pour it on your garden soil, you are going to cook the roots of your plants and sterilize the top inch of your living soil. You will kill the earthworms, the springtails, the beneficial nematodes, the fungal hyphae, everything that makes soil alive. It is like curing a headache by cutting off your head. Technically it works, but is it a reasonable solution? No. No, it is not. So we have eliminated the usual suspects, and we are left with the question: what actually feeds plants in a way that builds soil health, lasts for months, costs almost nothing, and produces results that make your neighbors suspicious? The answer is so simple that I almost feel silly telling you. But then I look at my tomato jungle, and I stop feeling silly. I learned this from a woman named Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 doors down from me in my old neighborhood. She was in her late 70s, maybe early 80s, and her garden was legendary. People would slow their cars down to look at it. Her roses were the size of salad plates. Her vegetable beds produced so much food that she set up a little table by the sidewalk with a sign that said free, take what you need. And it was not just a few zucchinis. It was baskets of perfect tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplants, herbs tied with twine. She would just give it away, every day, all summer long. I was maybe 5 years into my own gardening journey at that point, struggling with leggy seedlings and yellowing leaves, and I finally worked up the courage to ask her what her secret was. I walked over there one Saturday morning with a loaf of banana bread my wife had made, as a sort of offering, a bribe really, and I said, Mrs. Henderson, I need to know what you do. I expected her to tell me about some exotic compost tea, or a rare amendment she ordered from a specialty supplier. I expected her to reveal a complicated system of crop rotation and cover cropping and soil testing that I would need a degree to understand. Instead, she invited me into her kitchen, opened a cabinet, and pointed to a box that I had in my own kitchen at that very moment. I had walked past it 1,000 times and never once thought to take it outside. Plain baking soda. Sodium bicarbonate. That is the whole thing. That is the ingredient that made my garden explode this year. And I know that sounds too simple. I know it sounds like one of those internet hacks I just told you I roll my eyes at. But stay with me, because it is not the baking soda itself that does the magic. It is what baking soda does to the soil ecosystem, and how it unlocks nutrients that are already there, trapped and unavailable, just waiting for the right key. Mrs. Henderson explained it to me like this. Most garden soils have plenty of phosphorus and potassium, and all the micronutrients plants need. They are bound up in mineral particles that are too large for roots to absorb. The nutrients are present, but they are locked behind a chemical door. Baking soda is the key that opens that door. When you add a small amount of sodium bicarbonate to your soil, it creates a very mild alkaline shift that encourages beneficial bacteria to multiply rapidly. These bacteria produce enzymes that break down organic matter and release those locked-up minerals into a form that roots can actually take up. It is not feeding the plant directly. It is feeding the soil food web, and the soil food web feeds the plant. That is the fundamental difference between this and pouring blue liquid fertilizer on your beds. One is a handout. The other is teaching the soil to fish. One creates dependency. The other creates resilience. And once you understand that distinction, you will never look at a bottle of synthetic fertilizer the same way again. Now let me be very precise here, because the difference between a garden that explodes and a garden that gets burned by too much sodium is all in the dosage. I am going to give you the exact recipe and the exact method, and I want you to follow it carefully. Do not eyeball this. Do not think that if a little is good, more must be better. More is not better. More is how you get salty soil and sad plants. More is how you undo all the good you are trying to do and end up with a patch of ground where nothing wants to grow. I have a friend who tried this after I told him about it, and he decided to double the concentration because he figured it would work twice as fast. His beans turned yellow and dropped their flowers, and he called me up asking what went wrong. What went wrong is he ignored the dosage. Do not be like my friend. Stick to the numbers and you will be fine. For every square yard of garden bed, you need 1 tablespoon of plain baking soda. Not baking powder, which has added acids and starches. Plain sodium bicarbonate. The kind that costs maybe $2 for a pound at any grocery store. That pound will treat something like 75 square yards of garden, which is more than most backyard gardens total. So we are talking about an investment of literal pennies per square foot. I told you this was cheap. I was not exaggerating. I did the math on my own garden. I have about 40 square yards of beds, which is a decent size for a home gardener. Treating the entire thing cost me less than $1. Less than a single dollar to transform the whole growing season. Compare that to the $50 or $60 I used to spend on fertilizers every spring, and it is almost laughable. I felt like I had been paying a cover charge to get into a club that was free all along. The application method matters just as much as the amount. You do not want to just sprinkle dry baking soda on the soil surface and hope for the best. If you do that, the first time you water, it will dissolve into a concentrated puddle in one spot and run off, giving you uneven results and potentially burning roots where it pools. Instead, you dissolve the baking soda in water first, and you apply it as a drench. Here is the step-by-step. Fill a 5-gallon bucket with water. It does not need to be rainwater or distilled or anything fancy. Tap water is fine, though if your water is heavily chlorinated, letting it sit out overnight to off-gas the chlorine is a good practice for any garden application, not just this one. Chlorine kills microbes, and since the whole point of this exercise is to feed the microbes, you want to minimize anything that works against that goal. I fill my buckets the night before and leave them on the patio. By morning, the chlorine has dissipated and the water is at ambient temperature, which is better for the soil than cold water straight from the tap. To that 5 gallons, add exactly 5 level tablespoons of baking soda. Stir it until it dissolves completely, which takes about 30 seconds. It dissolves easily, no clumping, no drama. The water will look slightly cloudy for a moment and then clear right up. Now you have a very dilute solution, roughly 1 tablespoon per gallon, and that is your application rate. Pour this solution slowly and evenly over your garden beds, aiming for the soil, not the leaves. You want the root zone saturated. Use a watering can with a rose attachment if you have one, or just pour carefully from the bucket. Walk slowly. Cover every inch. You will see the water soak in and darken the soil, and you want that even coverage across the whole bed. 1 5-gallon bucket of this solution will cover about 5 square yards, which is a standard 4-foot by 12-foot raised bed. Apply it in the morning, before the heat of the day, so the soil has time to absorb it before evaporation kicks in. Morning application also gives the plants a full day of photosynthesis to start using the newly available nutrients. And do this exactly once at the beginning of the growing season, about a week after you transplant your seedlings or after your direct sown seeds have their first set of true leaves. That is it. One application. You do not repeat it every week. You do not apply it monthly. One time at the start, and then you let the soil biology do its work for the rest of the season. The microbes you wake up will keep working for months. They do not need a reminder. They just need you to not interfere. Now, I want to address something that might be nagging at you, because it nagged at me. Sodium. Baking soda contains sodium, and sodium is generally bad for soil structure and plant health in high concentrations. We have all heard about the dangers of salting the earth. It is one of the oldest metaphors for total destruction. So how is this different? It is different because of the concentration. The amount of sodium in 1 tablespoon of baking soda dissolved in a gallon of water is incredibly small. It is roughly 1,200 milligrams of sodium per gallon spread over a square yard of soil. To put that in perspective, that is less sodium than what naturally occurs in a handful of compost or what gets deposited by a single light rain in coastal areas. Your soil microbes process it quickly, and the plants use a portion of it as a micronutrient. Sodium is actually an essential element for some plants in tiny amounts, particularly beets, chard, and celery. It does not accumulate. It does not build up. It does not turn your garden into a salt flat. I have been doing this for 3 seasons now on the same beds, and I have sent soil samples to my local extension office for testing. The sodium levels are normal. The organic matter is up. The microbial activity is off the charts. The science holds up. And here is another thing I want to be honest about, because I promised you I would not just give you the success story without the full picture. If your soil is already very alkaline, if you live in an area with naturally high pH soils like parts of the Southwest, or areas with a lot of limestone bedrock, you need to be more cautious. Baking soda will raise pH slightly, and if your soil is already at an 8 or above, you might push it into a range where certain nutrients become less available. Iron, for example, gets locked up in alkaline soils, and plants show iron deficiency as yellowing between the leaf veins. Before you do anything, get a simple soil pH test. They cost a few dollars at any garden center. If your pH is between 6 and 7.5, you are in the sweet spot, and this treatment will do wonders. If you are above 8, use half the concentration, or consider getting your pH down with elemental sulfur first before you try this. I am not here to sell you a one-size-fits-all miracle. I am here to tell you what worked for me and how to adapt it to your situation. And that brings me to why this works on a deeper level, because I think understanding the mechanism is what separates a gardener who tries a trick once from a gardener who integrates a principle forever. Plants do not eat fertilizer. That is the first thing to understand. Plants eat what soil microbes excrete after they break down organic matter and mineral particles. The plant actually feeds the microbes first, by releasing sugars and carbohydrates from its roots into the surrounding soil, a process called root exudation. Those sugars attract bacteria and fungi, which gather around the roots and start breaking down whatever is nearby. The microbes release the nutrients in plant-available form, and the plant takes them up. It is a trade. Carbon for nutrients. The plant is farming the microbes. It is a system that has been running for hundreds of millions of years, long before humans showed up with our blue powder and our spray bottles. The plant knows what it needs. It just needs the microbial partners to be present and active. Baking soda accelerates this entire system. The mild alkalinity it provides is exactly the pH range that the most beneficial bacteria prefer. They wake up, they multiply, they get to work. And the bicarbonate ion itself is a source of carbon, which the microbes can use as energy. So you are essentially giving the soil microbiome a little jump start, a kick in the pants, right when your plants are establishing their root systems and need the most support. You are not feeding the plant. You are feeding the invisible workforce that feeds the plant. Once that microbial community is thriving, it self-regulates. It does not need you to keep adding things. It just needs you to not mess it up with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. It needs you to keep adding organic matter as mulch and compost, which is the ongoing food supply for the soil food web. The baking soda is just the starter motor. The compost and mulch are the fuel. I saw this play out in real time this season. About 2 weeks after I applied the baking soda drench, I noticed that the soil in my treated beds looked different. It was darker, more crumbly, and it held moisture longer between waterings. I would stick my finger in the soil 2 days after a rain, and it still felt damp and cool, whereas the untreated beds were already drying out. When I pulled back the mulch, there were earthworms everywhere, big fat ones, way more than I had seen in previous years. Earthworms are a sign. They do not show up in dead soil. They need organic matter and microbial life to feed on, and they were there in numbers I had never seen. And the plants were a deeper green than I had ever achieved. Not the dark, almost bluish green of nitrogen overload, but a healthy, vibrant, waxy green that just looked right. The kind of green you see in forests, where no one is fertilizing anything and everything is thriving anyway. The leaves had a thickness and a substance to them. They did not wilt in the afternoon heat the way they used to. They stood up straight, like they had a structural integrity that came from within. Let me give you some specific results, because I know that is what you are here for. My cherry tomato plant, a Sungold variety that I have grown for years, typically tops out at about 5 feet and produces maybe 100 tomatoes over the season. This year, with the baking soda treatment and nothing else different, same variety, same location, same watering schedule, that plant is over 7 feet tall, has branched into 4 main stems, and I have already harvested over 200 tomatoes with more setting every day. I have to harvest every morning now or the fruit gets too heavy and the branches start to bend. My pepper plants, which usually give me maybe 6 or 7 peppers each, are loaded with 15 to 20 fruits per plant. The jalapenos are so thick I am smoking them, pickling them, stuffing them, and still giving them away. And the basil is the real indicator for me, because basil is sensitive. It tells you immediately when something is off. Yellow leaves, stunted growth, it complains. In previous years, my basil would start strong in June and then slowly decline, the leaves getting smaller and paler until by August it was barely worth harvesting. This year my basil plants are knee-high and bushy, with leaves the size of my palm, and I am making pesto by the quart. I have frozen so much pesto that my freezer is running out of space. Now there is one caution I need to give you, and it is important. Baking soda works beautifully for most common garden vegetables and flowers. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, beans, marigolds, zinnias, roses. But there are plants that prefer acidic soil, and for those, You want to skip this treatment or apply it very sparingly. Blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, camellias, potatoes. These plants thrive in a lower pH, and adding something alkaline will work against what they need. If you have a mixed garden, just avoid the root zones of your acid-loving plants. The rest will thank you. And this is the part where I reflect on why this knowledge is not more widespread. Mrs. Henderson knew about it because her grandmother knew about it. And her grandmother probably learned it from someone who noticed that certain soils produced better crops and figured out why through decades of observation. Before we had agricultural extension offices and soil testing labs, farmers and gardeners paid attention to results and passed down what worked. Baking soda as a soil amendment is not a new idea. It is an old idea that got buried under a mountain of commercial products with bigger advertising budgets. There is no profit in telling someone to buy a $2 box of baking soda once a season. There is a lot of profit in selling them a $12 bottle of concentrated liquid fertilizer every month. I'm not saying there is a conspiracy. I am saying that the incentives are not aligned with simple, cheap solutions, and so those solutions fade from common knowledge. They get forgotten, generation by generation, until someone like Mrs. Henderson remembers and someone like me finally asks. My job here is to pull them back into the light. So here is what I want you to do. If you have a garden, or even just a few pots on a balcony, try this. 1 tablespoon of plain baking soda per gallon of water. Apply it once at the start of the season to moist soil around your plants. Then step back and watch. I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am asking you to test it yourself, on a single plant or a single bed, and compare it to whatever you normally do. I did exactly that, and the side-by-side difference was so stark that I could not ignore it. The untreated plants were fine. The treated plants were magnificent. It was the same soil, the same sun, the same water, the same seeds. The only variable was a box of baking soda that I already had in my refrigerator absorbing odors. I think about what Mrs. Henderson told me before she moved away. She said that the best gardeners are not the ones who spend the most money. They are the ones who pay the most attention. The soil is already full of everything your plants need. You just have to wake it up. And sometimes the key to waking it up is something so ordinary that you overlook it 100 times before you finally see it for what it is. I overlooked baking soda for years. Now I buy it in bulk, not just for the kitchen but for the garden shed too. It has become as essential to my spring routine as starting seeds and turning the compost pile. If this was helpful to you, if it changed the way you think about what your garden needs, then do me a favor. Share this with someone who is frustrated with their plants right now. Someone who has done everything right and still is not seeing the results they want. Send them this. Tell them to try it. The more of us who rediscover these simple, forgotten methods, the less power the expensive, complicated products have over us. And the more gardens there are out there overflowing with tomatoes and peppers and basil, which is a world I want to live in. I will be out in my garden, tying up another branch of tomatoes that has gotten too heavy for its cage, and feeling grateful that a neighbor I barely knew took the time to share her secret with me. Now I am passing it on to you. Go make your garden explode.